Awesome.
It's kind of awesome. It looks like I staged the background. There's tulips right over my shoulder.
It
That's
is good.
funny. All right. I'm going to leave those right there.
Well, welcome everybody, and welcome Chris Lashua. This is our fourth or fifth artist interview on dance and circus. And I'm Caroline Kalushin. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And we're just going to dive right into just kind of give us a background of how you got to doing circus and German wheel and where you are today, as you know, nutshellish, but
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm based in Vegas, and it's a long and winding road that got me here. I'm actually from New England. I grew up about, I don't know, maybe an hour or so from where NECA is located in Vermont. For those of you in New England and circus people that know of that program. And my background was with BMX, so the acrobatic bicycle, what's now more commonly referred to as X Games or Vert BMX or Flatland BMX. And that's what I did every waking moment from the time I was, I don't know, I was 10 years old, all through high school. I was touring all over North America, doing exhibitions and shows at bike shop parking lots or shopping malls, stages, sporting events, half times, things like that. And I went to university in Boston. I went to Boston University, got a degree in advertising, financed my college education doing bike shows and BMX. So I've been performing kind of my whole life.
and when did you go to college and stuff?
This was yeah. That was I graduated high school in '86.
Okay.
I started at Boston University right after, graduated in '90, and I thought I wanted to be a freelance art director. I kept cycling throughout university. I didn't have a typical college experience because I was gone every weekend for competitions or exhibitions. I was sponsored by the national bike companies and clothing companies, and they would send me off every weekend. So not a typical college experience, but it paid the bills, and I stayed current enough that a friend of mine who I had worked with through my teams had gotten a call from the casting guy at Ringling Brothers. His name is Tim Holtz. He's since passed away, and Tim was for years. He was the main guy at Ringling that did all the casting. So he would find the talent wherever in the world they were. He'd go to at the far reaches of civilization and some places less so to find circus talent. He was looking for some guys to go to represent Ringling Brothers at a circus festival in China, the Wuchao Festival. And I got this call, and they said, "Hey, do you want to?" A friend of mine said, "You'd be interested in going to China for a couple of weeks?" And I'd never left the country before. I'd been to Canada, that family from New Brunswick, but so I was, the BMX thing was kind of fading. I was geared more into like trying to find a job and getting internships after college. But I thought, like, wow, what a great thing to get to go to China. So sure, of course, so I met Tim, and we worked out in a park, and we created this 4-minute act with a friend of mine, a partner of mine, and we went off and we did this circus festival. I knew nothing about the festival world. I had gone to Ringling Brothers as a kid. I went every year. We'd go to Boston Garden and see this big, huge, the scale of it when you're little too is so, kind of profoundly, impactful, right? But I had no desire. There were some people that were doing BMX that joined the circus that went off. There was a guy from New England, Brett Alexander, some other people that went and went into the circus. I was doing kind of gig work, where I could go for a weekend and then go back to college. And so it really wasn't appropriate for me at the time. And I had no idea, how much I would like it when I finally got involved. But when I was in China, I met one of the founders of Cirque du Soleil, a guy named Gilles St. Croix, who kind of took me under his wing. I was the only American there, and he was there with an American artist that they were presenting at the festival. Her name was Rebecca Perez. And so the three of us kind of hung out for the 2 weeks together, and we kind of became friends. And I had no idea who Cirque du Soleil was. I had no concept of what it meant to have theatrical circus. Carlos, hello, nice to see you, buddy. Sorry, we have a friend of us that just joined. So I had no idea, and he told, so he said, well, we have one of our shows called Nouvelle Experience. It's featured on HBO this month. So when you get back, check it out. And so I really had no sense for what they were all about. I went back to Boston and went back to my advertising freelance work and found somebody who had HBO because it wasn't like it is now. I was a college student, so I didn't have it. So I went to a friend's place and I watched Nouvelle Experience, and I was blown away. I'd never seen anything like it. Had no concept that there was anything being done like that. Of course, Cirque du Soleil wasn't the first one to do it, but they were definitely out there doing it in a way that most people in North America had never seen anyway. That combination of theatricality and all the things we take for granted now in what is theatrical circus. I was blown away. And a couple weeks later, I got a call from Gilles, and he said, hey, we're putting our show together to go to Japan. This was in the summer of '92. We're putting together a show, and we had Bicycle in that show. It was actually, they were redoing a show, their first show, the show that put them on the map, the show that they went to the arts festival in LA with, and that kind of got them noticed, was called Cirque Reinventé. And they were doing that show in Japan, but they wanted to add a bit of a kind of a more youthful presentation to the bicycle act. They had a big group bicycle with 15 people on it going in circles, kind of traditional group bicycle act, which is kind of a common or popular act in Chinese circus. So they wanted to do something that was a bit more Western, so that it wasn't just an act that people in Asia were already familiar with. So he asked me to come along and do a solo performance as part of that show. That show was actually called Fascination because it was a mix of Cirque Reinventé, but it utilized the cast and the artists and the acts from Nouvelle Experience, which is the act that I had seen on HBO. So it was one of those calls, which is not that uncommon if you talk to people in the circus world. It was one of those things where he was like, hey, we have this opportunity, but you need to tell me tomorrow, and I was like, and it's like for 6 months, and I'm like, I was freelancing at an ad agency, and I was trying to get that whole world going, and that call came, and I was just kind of like thrown, like I didn't have any, it wasn't my dream to do it. I didn't know I wanted to do it. And I kind of hemmed and hawed for a day or so, and then I called back and I said, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do it. What do I need to do? And he said, well, we're gonna bring you to Montreal in 2 weeks. By now, and now it was like, I think it was February or something like that, and the rehearsals start right away, and we're gonna do 10 cities in Japan, and I thought, okay, well, here we go. So I went up and I went to Montreal, and it was like, it was in Boston, even though it was February, I think there was like, it's like spring weather, and then I go to Montreal and it's like 3 feet of snow had just fallen the night before. Everything's closed. I'm in this like kind of dumpy motel that they used to put people in, called the Richebourg, which is over by the old Forum on the guess that would be the western side of the city. And I'm in my hotel room, and it's like snow like to my waist, and I brought no winter clothes, and I go out on St. Catherine Street to find winter clothes, and there's nothing open because at the time nothing was open on Sundays. So I went back to my room and turned on the TV, and it was like everything was in French. And luckily I studied French in high school, but it was terrible at the time. And Star Trek Next Generation was on, and I was like, okay, this isn't so bad. Well, that finished, and then I'm sitting in the hotel room, and I started like, what am I doing here, And I was really close to just packing up my stuff and being like, I'm out of here. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, I don't know what is going on, And I didn't. The next morning they show up, they pick me up, they bring me to the studio, and I'm surrounded by all these circus people, and then I'm like, okay, this is kind of okay. This is going to be great. People were super warm and accepting, and I was the first kind of American at the time that had worked for the company. It was all French Canadian, lots of French, and some Chinese, and people were warm and welcoming, and I felt so I kind of accepted right away, and it was phenomenal. And I went off to Japan. I did those months in Japan, and when I came back, Cirque du Soleil was going to Las Vegas, opening a show, their show Nouvelle Experience at the Mirage. This is before they built Treasure Island, before they built any of the shows, resident shows. They were doing this as a test in Las Vegas to see if it would take off. And I wasn't part of that because Nouvelle X didn't have a bicycle act, but all of my friends that were in Japan were going to Vegas. So when we finished our tour in Japan, and we all go home at the end of September or something, they were all headed to Vegas early September, driving across the country, many of them from Montreal. And I was in Boston at the time. And so I got a call saying, hey, you know, we're gonna drive through Boston, we're gonna grab you and kidnap you and bring you with us to Vegas. And I was like, ha ha, very funny. I ended up getting in the car and taking off and going on a road trip. And that road trip has been, you know, as long as it's been. I don't know, what are we now? So it's 20 years or something like that.
Still on that road trip.
So I never really went back. I got in the car with a backpack, and we were supposed to just go camping for a few days on the way to Vegas, and then I was going to fly home. And I got there, and they were like, hey, we're gonna set up the trapeze rig next week. You should wait so you can fly on the trapeze before you go home. And I'm like, oh, cool, I'll wait a week. And, you know, I was crashing on people's couches. And then a week later, they were like, oh, Saltimbanco's premieres party is in LA, in Santa Monica, like next week. You should stay another week. And I was like, okay, I'll stay another week. And then they were like, hey, the premiere is next week. You should stay. It's going to be a big party, and we're going to have a great time. So I stayed. And just before the show opened, the wardrobe lead, her name is Therese Denis, she came to me. She's like, Chris, I know you're here to see the show and to hang out, but like, I just had to fire my dresser. I need somebody who backstage who can like help us dress the stilt characters and run around and help me. And would you mind? You know? And I was like, okay. So I stayed, and I was homme lavage. I was like laundry boy for a couple of months. I did rigging cues. I did stagehand cues because all of my friends were the artists. My best friend was a tightrope walker. So I would go in every day, set up the tightrope with him. I'd set up the trapeze net so I could help the trapeze artists and fly on the trapeze. And I learned all the rigging cues. And, you know, a month later or so, they asked me to be a stagehand because they needed somebody to, you know, pull ropes and move gear around and open trap doors and all that stuff. And then after that, about 2 months later, we were out on a motorcycle ride, and my friend wiped out in a turn and blew out his shoulder, and he was one of the riggers. And so he needed somebody to do the rigging. So they were like, Chris, you know the rigging cues. You want the job? And I was like, sure. So now I'm on the rigging team. And this is all in the span of like 6 or 7 months, you know. So I finished out the show at the end of that as a rigger. In the meantime, I'd seen a photograph of a guy in what we now know as a German wheel. And a photograph is like, it was like it was a piece of paper printed out like in a, you know, copying machine of a person in this round wheel. And I couldn't really tell the dimensions, how big is the wheel or anything, but I thought that looks really cool. That's something maybe I could do. I haven't seen that before. So I, while I was working there, I started looking for somebody in town that I could, you know, have build me a wheel. This was right at the end of Nouvelle Experience, and I didn't have a job. They offered me to go to Saltimbanco in Europe with much of the team. That changed, and then they ended up saying, sorry, we don't have a job for you. You need to stay in Las Vegas. We've got a job for you as a rigger on the stair. So I ended up sticking around. They needed somebody to babysit the tent once they loaded out of the tent. So I became kind of the de facto tent master for a month or so while they were emptying the tent and getting everything out of that and taking it down. So I got to like hang out in there and, you know, rappel from the cupola, do anything else I wanted. It was like my little playground for a few weeks. In the meantime, I was going over to Treasure Island and watching the rehearsals with Franco Dragone as he was putting the show together. And then I moved over there as a rigger. I built the German wheel, and I had no idea what I was doing. I had my friends from the circus that were artists that I had known from the previous projects that were now at the Stair, and they would help me. You know, like none of us had seen really video of German wheel, so we didn't know what was possible, what wasn't possible. So I did I was on it, you know, every hour I could after the show from midnight until 3 a.m. I'd be out there rolling around the wheel on stage at the Stair. It was a very different time, you know, like there was kind of no oversight, no rules, you know, you just kind of, I could go in early, I could go to the shop, I could work with the guys in the shop to build things or make me platforms or change the handles. And then I would go upstairs and work with my friends that were artists, and they would say, hey, you should try this, or why don't we try that, or I'll spot you on this hip circle. Or and the greatest thing about that, and this is something for people that are doing circus now, it's a blessing and a curse that you have YouTube, and that you have video. It's a blessing because you can see some amazing material, right? And you can learn quickly. The challenge is that it's kind of a trap. We see something cool and we think, wow, I want to do that. And now I can actually watch it, and I can rewind that, and I can watch that again, and I can teach myself, which is fantastic. The challenge is then it's a little bit of a running race. I want to do that. And so then it's all about like replicating what you've seen rather than doing the research. And the research is important twofold, and then I'll get back to the story. It's important twofold. It's important on one level because believe it or not, not everything that can be done has been done with a particular apparatus. And if you're spending your time learning what other people have done, you won't find that other thing. The other thing is as you watch other people's transitions and movement, you end up trying to replicate a transition or a style of movement that maybe isn't yours. And you really only find that after putting in the time. And that's how you set yourself apart, really, in circus in general. That's a whole nother story, right? Is like, I'm doing aerial hoop. How do I get work? Because there's so many other people doing it. So it's important that if you as you use YouTube or TikTok or whatever video source you're using to find inspiration, make sure you spend at least as much time on just blind research. What does this prop do? How can it function? How does it move? What does it do if I tip it over? What does it do if I stand on it? What does it do if I throw it up in the air? What does it do if I hang from it? Whatever you can do to treat it like it's a brand new thing that you have no idea what it does. Because you will find vocabulary that is unique to you, and you will find most of the stuff that people have done anyway. It just takes a little bit longer if you're on your own. But you'll also find your own class of movement. You'll find your own way of moving that is unique to you. And that's going to be important as you grow professionally. Back to video and back to working as a German wheel artist. So I was determined to get German wheel into a Cirque du Soleil show. That was my goal, was to get back on stage. I had a decent job, I was on the rigging team and it was great, but I was so missing. I'd watch the show from the grid every night. And then I'd go downstairs and grab my wheel from the trap, bring it up on the whole stage lift and work out. And my circus artist friends would yell at me from the balcony or, give me guidance. And I would know when the bosses were coming to town. When Jill would come to town, I would make sure I was on stage. I would make sure that I was, front and center and I was visible, and that he knew that I was working on this apparatus, and I was convinced that they should put it in one of their shows. And he came up to me one day and he said, Chris, yeah, I know, I like what you're doing with the wheel. And I think we're going to try to include it in a new project. And I found this guy in Germany. He's fantastic, and I was like, oh my God, I was crushed, that I felt so like a bit betrayed, come on, man, I've been working really hard at this, and I've showed this to you. This is what I thought, and of course it was out there in the sports world, not really done in circus at all as an act. So I felt completely crushed, Luckily for me, a guy named Wolfgang Bienzler, who ended up being my coach, really didn't know who Cirque du Soleil was, kind of like I didn't. And when they offered him a job, he was kind of like, nah, I'm good. I'm world champion of sports acro gym wheeling in Germany, and I'm not really interested in being in a circus. And he turned him down, which was a benefit to me, because then they came back and he said, Chris, so that other guy said no. And it was suggested that maybe
isn't he in America now?
He is. He's in Chicago.
Chicago. Thank you.
Yeah. And so Wolfgang was a fantastic coach. And if anybody wants to learn German wheel, he's the best there is. So he came. His approach though was very sport, and I was coming at this from like BMX, right? So very street, very kind of urban, a little bit maniacal, a little bit mischievous, a little bit aggressive, more so than smooth. What had happened was, in terms of processes, Cirque du Soleil, then Gilles gave me this, this is back in the day, guys, VHS, it was a video cassette. And he said, here's a tape of this guy's act. why don't you take a look at it? Essentially, why don't you do this act? And I'm like, well, okay, I'll take a look. And I did what everybody does, when you get a video of something you really want to do, you learn it and you study every moment and every breath and every bit of it, and you try to emulate. And I did, and I couldn't do it. I mean, I did most of the technique. About half of the technique I had discovered with my friends, circus people who had a background. And as most of you in circus know, so much of the vocabulary transfers from device to device, even aerial apparatus, and German wheel is the funny thing is it's essentially a set of rolling parallel bars. So for those of you that are gymnasts, you could imagine all the work you could do if you're a P-bar person, or and then there's the straight bars that are across that you could do hip circles on, and you can sit on. So much of the vocabulary carries over, and so my friends had kind of showed me that. So we had kind of found about half of the material in Wolfgang's video. The other half was stuff that I never would have been able to believe was possible, and started training on. And I went to Germany to train with Wolfgang, and I had never seen anybody other than him do it. I had seen photographs. By now I'd done a bunch of research, and I'd seen pictures of like 20 people in a gym rolling back and forth in wheels. So I go into this gym. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning, and there's 20 kids of all age range rolling back and forth. And then on one half of the gym they're rolling in straight lines. The other half of the gym they're doing coin work. And I was like this is like, what is going on? It's like the Twilight Zone. And I brought my wheel, which I had made, and my wheel was made based on a picture, right? So it was not. For those of you who don't know German wheel, it's a gymnastic sport discipline first. Okay. It came to circus much later. And what that means is that it's a sporting apparatus, a gymnastic apparatus, much like pommel horse or anything else. There are certain dimensions, and those dimensions are relative to your height. But the handles are in exactly the same location. The feet planks are in exactly the same location, and you don't mess with that. But I know that, so I built this wheel, and it was a little bit wider, a little bit shorter. The handles were in funny places. I had built these straps that allow my feet to slide in and take my feet out. And when I got there, and I brought my wheel in, they were, the kids and the adults and the teens were looking at my wheel like, what is this thing? This is not a German wheel, And they asked me, so what are those things where you put your feet? Why do you have a seat belt that's sewn on this thing, and it's a loop that you can slide your feet in? Because what they had were belts, like leather belts that you would buckle your feet into. And I was like, oh, well, it's because I can spin around, jump out of the wheel, and then I can throw my feet in and I can keep going. And they were like, whoa, like you could see that was like a light bulb. And that's a perfect example of like when you're too close to something, or when you learn it by what has been done, you don't know what can be done. I didn't know it was against the rules to put loops on my footboards. And now every one of the German wheels that's sold, that's shipped out of Germany, comes with what Holger refers to as the American system. And that was just because we didn't know, we didn't know any better, right? So we came up with that system for a way to get out of the wheel. The point about that is it's just about like not knowing. Sometimes you can set off on a path that's very different. I also had a class of movement that was completely unorthodox. So and not necessarily embraced or I don't know, sanctioned by the German background. Was very like, look, this is a sport, this is serious, and we have a very, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise, it's very formal, right? It's like your hands will be placed at this angle on your hips, you will have your head up, you will not bend in the waist, and much of that is for technical reasons, right? Because the proper form will give you the ability to control this big thing, which weighs as much as you do. And if you use the proper technique, the wheel suddenly weighs nothing. And proper technique is absolutely critical. However, sometimes it doesn't look so good. So I had the distinct advantage of having this movement style and quality that was much looser. And then I had the ability to take that training and integrate both. And that's what really was able to help me to kind of create a piece that was very different from anything that had been done with German wheel before. And also that was less sport feeling, less rigid feeling. It was much more of a freestyle feel. and it's the act that I developed for Cirque du Soleil's Kidam. And the character grew out of the fact that I was kind of a, like, not a street punk, but I was definitely, less of a sport guy than I was a skater type, And Franco Dragone, who was the director at the time, recognized that, and they were still trying to get me to do the performance in the style of Wolfgang, which was a much more debonair, much more smooth and fluid. He had a kind of an act that he did. It was really like it was like a Fred Astaire kind of number. He had a cigarette and he had a jacket on. It was this really suave thing, and it was amazing. But I couldn't do it. It was not me at all. And about halfway through our rehearsals in Montreal, Franco was getting frustrated with me because I wasn't in my own skin. I was doing it and if he finally got to the point, he saw something that I had done, and he said, "Oh, you know what? Go get Chris a hat." And he got me a little derby hat, like a bowler, and go get him some gloves. And then I kind of had my head down and I had the hat on and I did a thing like that. He's like, that's going to be your bow. And he said, Clockwork Orange, Clockwork Orange? And I was like, yeah, Clockwork Orange. Yeah, the guy's like a maniac. Like, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a pretty dark movie. But he said, like that's you, that could be you. And so we did that thing and we put the hat on, and just that little adjustment of the hat and the gloves kind of, the gloves help because, and this is something that people in dance movement, people know, like you put a glove on and suddenly, bam, your fingers feel like they're really, like an extra 3 inches long. And it forces you to feel your body all the way to your fingertips. And the hat allowed me to kind of be much more aware of where keep my head down, looking out underneath my eyebrows at the audience. And it gave it a style, and it was the kind of hook that I needed. And after that, he said, "Why don't you do the act the way that you feel it now?" And I did it, and that was it. And we never turned back. And I had a lot of help to kind of bring it out because again, I didn't have the background. The choreographer Debbie Brown she lost her mind with me. She kind of it was good. She had a backup. She had an assistant because she kind of bailed on me at one point. She was just like pulling her hair out. She's like, I can't deal with this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. He can't keep his head up on his shoulders. His posture's terrible. And luckily there was another choreographer named Allison Crawford, and she took me under her wing and concentrated and worked with me a bit more. She got me a little bit more in shape, and then Debbie came back on board, and they helped to make that the act that it was. And then from there, I did several years touring with Cirque du Soleil, traveled all over the world. But I started, after about 3 years, I started looking for a different way to do German wheel, and I built a machine that had a set of rollers that my wheel would sit on top of. So kind of like the way, especially nowadays, right now in our current situation, where people are inside all the time forcibly. People that cycle will get a set of rollers and put their bicycle on those rollers and you can spin in space. Well, I had this idea that I could train if I put a set of rollers and I put my wheel on a set of rollers and I could roll in place, which is kind of cool. And then I thought, wow, I should put those rollers on a set of wheels and gear it so that I could turn in my wheel and I could travel across the stage like an old pump cart on a railroad tracks from back in the day.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is, like check out.
I do.
So these old manual they're called hand carts or pump carts, right? Mm-hmm. This manual device that would go along the railroad tracks. The point is that I had created this device that was really industrial looking. It allowed for the wheel to spin on it, and it allowed for me to drive this whole trolley back and forth across the stage. Feedback I got from and this was while I was touring with Kidam. I was in Europe at the time, and I had found a welder, and and the shop guys were great. The technicians were fantastic. They were all friends of mine, and they helped me build this thing. And then I decided to add a winch. I thought, wow, how cool would it be if I could put a winch on this thing, and I could spin in my wheel, and by spinning in my wheel, I could create lift of an aerialist. So we have this device with a wheel on it, now it looks like a hamster wheel, right? For those who don't know German wheel, it's often compared to a hamster wheel, but it was never as much like a hamster wheel as when you put it on the set of rollers, because now really that's what it is, right? You're running inside this thing like a person in a wheel, but now it's connected to a winch, which is pulling a cable, which is lifting an aerialist that's across on the other side of the stage. So we have this mechanical contraption with a circus device in the middle of it, with a cable connecting to an aerial hoop artist, which is this lyrical, beautiful performance over here, and then this clunky mechanical thing over here, and that all became part of the same image. And the research that I did on that was done with my creative partner since then. Her name is Lashua. She runs Cirque School LA in Los Angeles. One of the best kind of aerial kind of coaches and teachers out there. If anybody's looking for another place to get resources or go on a circus holiday somewhere other than Montreal to do some training, then you should check out Lashua. She was my creative partner. We kind of go onto the stage after the shows and hook up the trolley and hook up her hoop and play with this relationship between pushing the trolley across the stage and lifting and doing all kinds of research. And we took photos and my contract, by now I was done. I was like conjugating Spanish verbs as I was doing my act on stage. I was like really not there. I was still able to perform it, but my brain was not in the same place that I was. I've done the act now over 1,800 times. And I was looking for some new thing. And so I finished my contract and I came back to Vegas because Vegas is now kind of the home by now of several Cirque du Soleil shows. I knew that it would be a place that I could get work as a freelance artist or go back to a rigging job if I wasn't able to get work as a freelance artist. German Wheel was still virtually unseen anywhere, and it was still only in Quidam. And so when I finished and I came out, it was in great demand. I was doing freelance work as a German Wheel artist. I was doing 2 or 3 events a week. I'd fly to San Diego or drive to San Diego, come back, and then get on a plane, go to Orlando, and then 2 days later go to New Orleans, and then a week later go to Canada. And I was working for Cirque du Soleil Special Event Department at the time as well. So the freelance thing was good. So I actually didn't do much work as a rigger. I was on call at the Stair to kind of pay some bills. And for those of you that are artists that are starting out or in it, that's a big part of what we have to do as freelancers. We often have to have, you got to wear several hats, and you've got to find a way to keep going. The balance and the challenge for circus artists or freelancers in general is to make sure that your day job doesn't, it's really hard to do, right? But your day job, to make sure your day job doesn't get in the way of your dream, because it can, and it often does. And sometimes it's the reality of the situation. You got to pay your bills, So it's tough to strike that balance. I was lucky that I was able to keep performing, doing wheel. And about 6 months after I finished with my contract, I got a call from I did a little bit more time with Cirque du Soleil Special Events Department, and I kept doing research. Lashua had come back at one point. We did some playing around on stage at the Stair. It was on a break, I think, from Quidam, and then at one point she got a call from Gypsy Snyder, the Seven Fingers. Lashua and Gypsy were childhood friends. They grew up together in the Pickle Family Circus, and Gypsy had great success with their first show, which became known as Loft in San Francisco. This was in 2003, I guess. They did as both Gypsy and Lashua and Lorenzo were kind of students at the Circus Center of San Francisco. They have an end of the year kind of fundraiser school. An annual fundraiser for the school, and in 2003, I believe that was the first time they actually had a kind of professional circus company come in. It was Gypsy, and it was the Seven Fingers. They made, it was artistically hugely successful, as most of us know who know the company's work, and financially successful because they made a bunch of money. And so now they were looking for a way to do that again. They contacted Gypsy, and now they were up and running and doing shows all over the world and developing their content. And they couldn't do it, so she got a hold of Lashua and she said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing that? This show. You're doing some work with Chris. Maybe you guys could do something for the Circus Center." She contacted me, and she had now finished her contract with Cirque du Soleil. And she contacted me and said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity. Do you want to flesh out that kind of machine idea? We have some other ideas for machines." And I thought, yeah, like that would be amazing. So we did a little short video in Vegas, and I had the support of Cirque. I mean, they were great with me. I had the key to their training facility. It was a rehearsal space that they had when they were building the show's Humanity. So it was my space when they weren't in there. They were in there like 2 hours a day, and I had it the rest of the time. I had all my toys in there, and I would go in there, and we filmed a video in there. I had the lighting guy at Cirque du Soleil opened up the back door and filled up my truck with lighting gear, and we ran over there and hung it all up in the middle of the night, did a video, and he brought all the gear back the next day before anybody knew it was gone. Again, I said it was a different time. And we got that video done, and we brought that to San Francisco, and we sat down with the crew there, and we said, this is a show we want to build. And they were like, fantastic, let's do it. So that show became our first production, which is Birdhouse Factory, which we toured for almost 10 years. We're actually bringing that show back for one season. Well, it's scheduled to come back in the fall of 20 and the spring of 21. and that show, excuse me, integrated not just the trolley device, which is this big, the main device that we talked about. Sorry, let me grab a
You're good.
drink here. Yeah, it integrated not only the trolley device, but after I built that and I came back to Vegas, I designed a couple of other contraptions. I built a turntable device, which is basically a 7-foot round portable stage with a unicycle on each side and a swivel in the front and back, so you could drive this thing so both people could pedal it. And if the person on the left side pedaled backwards, it would spin in a circle. And if the pedal on the person on the other side, and so you steer it kind of like a bulldozer. And I had put a contortionist on it, and I'd put a rhythmic gymnast on it. And we kind of drove around, and we thought, wow, what a cool thing. We can now take an act that's static, like handstand or juggling or rhythmic gymnast, and put it on a device and drive it through the space and rotate it. I mean, more importantly, we could rotate it, right? Because suddenly now you have the capacity to take an act like a handstand and have that one-arm handstand happen, and now we could turn it around, or we could have contortion happen, and we could decide to show the act or that move from the most favorable position. You know, for those of us that are artists, we know there are certain times when we're in a pose we're like, oh, we don't want to have our crotch facing the audience at that moment or whatever, right? So now we have the capacity to take an act that's static and display it in a way that allows us to make it dynamic and bring it to life. And also, again, furthers the notion of what to me was so interesting, was this idea of mixing the mechanical with the lyrical and the beautiful, and that together those things become something that is more compelling and more interesting than they are apart. And the goal from the get-go was not just to do the work, like to lift the aerialist or to spin the person around, but to do it in a way that is visually interesting. The lifting of the aerialist with the rotation of the German wheel, the rotation of the contortionist by seeing the people pedaling this device. This is at the heart of what we do as a company, and that company grew to be the company that we tour with now, called Cirque Mechanics. Cirque for circus and mechanics for obvious reasons. And it's kind of at the heart of what we do. And some of the shows have devices that are as obviously mechanical and they're at the forefront, and other times they're a little bit more hidden. But in every one of our projects, there's a component that is either a scenic piece or a device that interacts with circus in a new way. And it's kind of been our process to design these devices, and to then, which is kind of reversed from the way that a lot of theater is done. We build the device, and then we decide what that device says or does or looks like, and then that device gets put in a context. In the case of Birdhouse, everything went into a factory. In the case of Boomtown, we had rolling trampolines that were dressed as mining ore carts on train tracks, and we had a set of telephone poles that were rigged together, much like a vertical teeter board, and those were telegraph poles that fell over in an explosion. So we look for ways to take these devices and immerse them in a scene, and then we get to work with our creative team and talk about, okay, now what kind of a story can we tell in that universe? And that's been our process, and that's kind of the same thing that we're in the midst of now. With this will be our 5th project, and the creation of theater work for touring shows. For those of you that are kind of putting small shows together, getting work together in the arts market, once you have an agency or you're out there doing theater work, the cycle for building a show, it's typically about they they start selling the show a year before it actually goes out on the road, right? So you need a name, and you need a concept, and you need a graphic like a year before you even have the show, and sometimes 6 months or so before you even start working on the show. So you've got to kind of you got to be vague and somehow concise at the same time in your marketing materials. It's a real challenge, and it's why, in some ways, one of the reasons that many circus companies have these kind of vague titles and graphics, because because it's really difficult to know that far in advance what the show will be. The other thing in a creation, it's hard to know what will be, where the show will go, because for our process, it's engineered in reverse. We don't always know, and we won't know sometimes until the show is open, really what the strongest story of the potential narratives that we have in place. Many of them start to take shape as the show is built and you're in rehearsals. But there are relationships that develop. There are things there's the kind of magic that happens when you get people in the space that you just can't know about. And sometimes those things become more compelling than the thing you thought was going to be, and the show can change and develop into something quite different than what you think it's going to be when it starts, at least for us. And we kind of embrace that. It can be really challenging, and if you're doing that kind of going through that process, you need to have people on your team that understand that process and accept that process, because it is fluid, and it can be infuriating. You know, we do have kind of our traditional roles. Aloysia's been my co-director and choreographer on every project from Birdhouse Factory and Boomtown, Battle Punk, our orchestra project, our show 42 Feet. Stephen Ragaz has been kind of our dramaturge and writer. He writes the comedic material and the clowning acts and works with the people that we have to develop those acts. Sean Riley's our scenic designer, rigging designer. These are the roles that they have. Our composer, Michael Picton, lighting director, Anthony Powers. But as we all get on board, these classifications melt away, right? Because they're all creative people, and we never want to tell somebody or limit them to be like, just think about movement. That lighting is not your concern. That's like terrible, right? So you have to have a team that understands and is generous and is self-confident enough to be able to take the input from somebody who may not know, like when the lighting director says, hey, that movement there, I feel this. And at the end of the day, right, what's most important is creating the content that is going to be the strongest and be the most compelling. And so it's important that you have people that understand that process. It's difficult, especially if you're bringing people in. If you circus artists are creating work and you're bringing in people from theater, you got to have some really long, in-depth conversations about the process and what it will be. And you will learn from them too. I mean, I learned a huge amount and continue to learn from our production director and stage manager, Janine Johnson, who's absolutely phenomenal. These people come from being educated in theater, and they have a lot to teach us about how to take circus and make sense of it. But our process is different than their process, and together you have to find your own. And lucky for me, we've found that, and it's difficult, but obviously it's been rewarding enough that they want to come back, because we're going to be doing a new project together, so that's a good thing. But the strength of any really show is a result of that collaboration. It's almost never any one person's vision of what that show will be. Of course, there's leadership necessary, but even someone with a great amount of vision, that vision doesn't ever really get fully realized without other people embracing it and making it their own. And that's one of the things that's more interesting to me about working in smaller scale productions. Lucky for me, when I joined Cirque du Soleil, it was small enough that we had one-on-one relationships with our directors and designers. That has changed greatly, and it's become much more difficult for artists, especially young artists, to have a voice and to be in this process to not just be a cog in the wheel and not just be a foot soldier, not just be a placeholder on stage, but to actually be somebody who's contributing. It's almost, and it's gotten increasingly difficult in large companies for many reasons that make sense. But it's one of the things that's so much more interesting for me and interesting for many artists that work in smaller companies, because you're in a small group and there's very little bureaucracy, there's very little baloney. It's just like, it's naked, it's scary, it's honest, and your insecurities and it's all out there, and everybody on the process knows it. And I think that's the thing you have to come to terms with when you're putting this kind of work together is being okay with not knowing the answers to the questions you get asked, and being okay with not knowing the answers yourselves when you're putting the project together. You have to face that you're going to get there, and you have to have some kind of design. You can't just go in with nothing in mind. You've got a goal and you've got a target, and you're setting off in one direction, but you really need to kind of keep your mind and brain open to all the magical things that happen when you put a bunch of circus people together, because you get often surprised. And your job on the creative team is to recognize those things and grab the nuggets that are things that we can expand upon, and make sure that the greatest stuff that everybody on the team is putting out there ends up on stage. And that's a challenge, because you have different voices and you have different kind of people in it. But it's also what makes it so exciting. I mean, it's maddening and it's crazy and it's frustrating, and it's Steve Ogatz, who I mentioned to you, is a writer and a fantastic juggler, and he was the main character in Birdhouse Factory. He's a fantastic kind of academic person, as is the case with many jugglers. There's a lot going on in his head. There's a lot of rationale, a lot of reason. And then I have Lashua, who's kind of the other co-director, who's choreographer, who is completely not of the kind of that analytical, structured kind of approach. She's much more free and loose and all of that kind of approach. And people ask me often, because I get Steven saying this, and it's just like, that's crazy, or he's saying that doesn't make sense. And for me, that's the best of all worlds in creation, because you have to have or in my case, I think it's helpful for us to have these voices that are so contradictory, and then them being secure enough and open enough to listen, right? And then we synthesize and we find our way through that challenge, and that is not compromise in the sense that, oh wow, that means that both people lose a little bit and now you end up with something that's half as good. That's always the challenge, right? Is to make sure that those compromises make sense, and that the compromise is something that while each of those two visions may see it as a compromise, the end result that's generated feels like the best solution you could have come up with. And that's something you just have to kind of have faith in, because when you're in the middle of it, it's infuriating and challenging. So somewhere along the line, I got into show creation.
I love it.
Why don't you maybe get me back on track if you want, Caroline?
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to pull it back on track with this one question, and then we'll open it up to everybody else who has any questions for Chris as well. And you can, when we open it up, you can type it or reveal yourself and unmute. My question is, so your first show you filmed on the back in Cirque du Soleil, and then you took a video to who did you take the video to? Like, who produced it? You found a producer in LA or something?
No, so we decided, and it was at the time it was Lashua and her partner Rex, who is still, Rex and Lashua run Cirque School in LA and True Vertigo. Rex, he filmed the video for us. He worked on the lights with a friend in lighting. Lashua did aerial hoop. I had some other friends that came in, did some choreography. We put together like a 3-minute video. We just filmed it in a warehouse. Luckily for us, the show we were presenting was a show about a factory. So I think I spent $300 to rent the backdrop from Gross Scenic in LA, and they shipped me this backdrop, and it looked like a factory backdrop. And the rest of it was just us, and we put on some overalls and some costumes that we pulled out of like Goodwill and some hats on, and we filmed this video. And it was dark and a bit moody, partially because we didn't have enough lighting to make it look any better. But it worked. You know, you have to work with the tools you have, and we were lucky enough to have people with good kind of instincts. Rex is really good at what he does. You know, he's good behind the camera. He's good with lighting, so he was able to kind of look at that and say like, wow, we don't have a lot of light here. What are we going to do? And we figured it out. And he kind of, you know, came up with a look that worked, and we created this 3-minute video. And that's all we had. And that video, we went to San Francisco, and it was Master Lu Yi, who is, who, for those of you who don't know him, he is kind of the preeminent circus coach from China. He was the lead kind of technical coach at the Circus Center in San Francisco. He coached everybody from, the Gypsy and Aloysia and Lorenzo and Elsie and Serenity of NECA. Wang Zhen, who was on Saltimbanco, the first husband of Shayna Carroll, who's one of the Seven Fingers as well, who also trained with Master Lu Yi. So this guy was kind of the master, and he was at the meeting, as well as a guy named Patrick. I'm forgetting some names. Dominic Jandot, who's a circus historian. They were kind of board members. They were there, and we presented this video, you know, and it was Aloysia and I, and we talked about the show we wanted to make, and it worked. You know, it was a little bit of a risk for them, but you know, we were also kind of seasoned professionals. You know, we had a kind of pretty good resumes. You know, I'd done 5 years with Cirque du Soleil. I worn a lot of hats at that organization, so I had technical background. We had some good people that wanted to be on the project with us already. Aloysia had a long history with them. I mean, she, you know, Gypsy's recommendation, Gypsy's royalty in San Francisco. So that was, you know, we were on the short list anyway, and they said, yeah, let's do it. So we were off and running.
Cool. Do you two have questions for Chris? You can unmute or type in the chat. I'm sure you do. Go ahead.
Something I'm wondering is, everything you're talking about sounds so incredible, and I'm trying to put that into perspective of like my path. And I was wondering if you have any advice or ideas of how, like, if you had to do your whole career over again starting now, do you have any ideas of where you would start, of like getting into this?
I'd make all the wrong choices if I knew what I know now. If I knew what I know, I probably would have. I might have bailed, right? Because I would have never understood what it takes to run a theater. I would have never understood that. I had people telling me, people that knew better when I finished at Cirque du Soleil. And I'll go back and I'll backtrack a little bit, but I want to say this. I had a guy, Francois Ducharme, who was the baby at Mystère. He's passed away about, man, I think it's close to 5 years ago or so, maybe even longer now. Fantastic guy. I knew him from Fascination in Japan. He did his act there. And Francois said to me, Chris, what are you gonna do with this machine? I said, I want to do shows. He's like, you want to be a theater company? And I was like, I guess so. And he's like, that's crazy. Are you kidding? Like, you know how much work that is? And I was like, not really. And he knew, right? And he knew, you know, and he was at Cirque du Soleil, which, you know, he had done his whole lifetime of struggling and being on his own and going through lots of hardship and having no work and having some work and having work that he didn't like, but he had to do. And so here's an opportunity with Cirque to do what he'd always trained to do. The difference for me, I guess, is that unlike him, who was doing material that he wrote, I was trying to find my way at Cirque. And then, you know, once I did do the German wheel, after that, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I don't want to keep doing this, you know? So I didn't know what was in store for me. And this is the thing for young people, especially people that want to do these, you want to get together with some of your friends from school, or you want to put a show together. and you should, and it is fantastic, and I'll come back around to why you should do it. But the thing that you should also know is the show itself is like it's like the tip of the iceberg. I'm showing, like, I'm pointing to my fingernail on my pinky. The tip of the show that you see is the fingernail on your pinky, right? The show that's backstage is like the rest of your hand. The show that's like makes all of that happen is like your arm, and then the show that enables that to tour is the rest of your body. It's absolutely unbelievable the amount of components that play in a show, in doing that show. Now, building a show once is different than building a show that's going to tour. Creating a show and creating a touring company is a whole nother layer of challenges, which we've navigated and figured out, but it's taken a very long time. So I would have probably made different choices. And I'm glad I would have been, scared. It would have been daunting. But what I would say is that, like, you listening to me kind of ramble sometimes incoherently maybe about my path. And it makes sense, right, in retrospect, right? But most things do. I mean, it's like if you look back, you see this and it seems like a natural order of things. None of those decisions you make on the front side are obvious, right? They're obvious when you look back. You think, wow, of course I had to go to China. And of course he called me after to have me join the show. And of course I went. And why wouldn't I have jumped in the car and gone with my friends to Vegas? Why wouldn't I have stayed for the opening Saltimbanco? Why wouldn't I have stayed and worked as the guy doing laundry because I got to hang out with my friends? Why? Because that led to this and that led to. They make sense because it paid off in a way that has allowed me to do what I love doing. But any given fork in the road could have gone a different way, right? So you kind of have to just trust your instincts. I mean, I think that's the toughest thing. And when you're at the stage where you're at, where you're just beginning this whole process, and you listen to somebody like myself tell you about how many steps it's taken to get where I've gotten, yeah, it can be a long journey, but every step of the way was I was in that moment, like you are now, and it was my universe at that time. Every decision about, like, should I train today? I'm rigging now at Mystère, and I'm tired, and I don't want to. Man, this German wheel training is going nowhere. And then my friend, I would have friends that would say, what'd you learn lately? And I'm kind of stuck, and I hadn't trained for a couple of weeks, and I was being cranky, and my wife at the time, who's still my wife and partner, creative partner, Aida, she'd be like, you need to get back on the wheel, and you need to keep doing that, and I'd be like, okay, I'd go back and I'd get on it, and I'd remember how fun it is. So you never do anything alone, right? I mean, like, I probably would have bailed. Like, honestly, if it wasn't for Aida, if it wasn't for my friends, I wouldn't have had the strength alone. And very few of us have the strength alone to do anything, right? You need community. That's why it's so important when you're at the stage you're at to find that community, to work on it, to build it, to nurture it, because you're going to need these people. You're going to need, your friends are going to nurture you when you're doubting yourself. Your friends are going to give you feedback. They're going to hold the camera. They're going to hold your safety line. And you're going to be there for them in the same way. And they're going to be able to help you through those moments of self-doubt, because you're all going to have them. Everybody has them. I still have them, and the only way we get through them is with the people that are on our team. So the sooner you can build that team around you, the better you're going to be. Yeah.
Awesome.
Did I answer? Did I get to most of your question, or I'm not sure if I got all of it. Yeah. Cool.
Does anybody else have any great questions for Chris? We can maybe take like one more. Go ahead, Loxley.
Ellie's definitely the wizard of asking questions, but I will attempt.
Okay.
In your opinion, where do you feel circus is going now? So we've sort of seen, like, I know more Cirque than other companies, but like the Kidam stage, and then it kind of with Volta went into this like newer age. And where do you sort of see it going now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're all kind of trying to evaluate what is circus now? How does it even happen now? What's going to happen in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years with performing arts in general? Will things be more online? And nobody really knows for certain the answers to any of these things. The one thing we do know is that live entertainment will always exist. Video will never replace live public performances, never. I think that there's nothing like being in a crowd of people, whether it's in a cinema or in a theater or on a street performance. And so people are always going to want to do that. Yes, there are plenty of those of us that are kind of like less, they're more antisocial at times, and we'll just like binge watch Netflix for days. But eventually you're going to want to come out and go outside and interact and be inspired. And so circus and theater and dance will continue to have a place in society once we figure this thing out. We will, it seems kind of dark and dreary, and how's this all going to work, and is it ever going to get going again? And in 3 months or a year, we're going to look back and be like, wow, we didn't think we were ever going to get out of this. We're going to get out of this. I don't know how long it's going to be, but we're going to, and it's going to be, it won't be that long before we're looking back thinking, oh, I can't believe we were stuck like that for so long. And we were second guessing, and we were thinking, wow, can I really do this? Should I continue doing circus? Is there a path for me? So in general, in terms of the performing arts and circus, we're all just trying to waiting for when that will happen. Plenty of articles. I'm a circus person, and I run a theater company, and so I'm reading everything I can read. There's everything comes across my newsfeed. There's articles from Broadway producers. What's Broadway doing? Broadway's going to shut down now until June. They're going to open in June. The West End in London, when are they going to open? They're not going to open until July. In some ways, this is all we can do, right? Is look, what are the markers? What are the things that are out there that can give us information about what might be to come? Because nobody really knows. They're saying they want to open theaters again. When they do, people aren't necessarily going to come until they feel safe. So just because somebody says we're gonna open shows back up, Cirque du Soleil is faced with this right now. Like, even if they, the mayor of Las Vegas wants to open up Vegas now. She's saying, like, there's no reason that Vegas is shut down. We have so few cases. Why we shut down? Because our economy in Vegas, as you would imagine, it's like, it's half of the city is unemployed. It's 2,000 or something Cirque du Soleil people out. All the shows are gone. It's difficult everywhere for sure. And we should be shut down for sure. But there are people who feel like, oh no, we need to get back at this. And I think even if they did come back and decide to open up next week or next month, I don't know that people are going to be in a place where they're ready to come back out and travel and sit in a theater yet. Not till we know a lot more. So it's going to take time. So that part of it, we're going to kind of have to sit and wait and be productive in the meantime. In terms of circus in general, like, where's it going? I think that we're going to see shows being made about isolation. We're going to see lots of themes of survival, maybe adversity. But this much like anything else, I think that now is no different in terms of being able to forecast what's the next show by this company or that company going to look like. All these, there's so many stories that will always need to be told, so many environments that circus can be presented in that still haven't been showcased. And so we're going to continue to find them. We meaning the circus community, not we meaning us. We meaning like all of us are going to continue to find them. And I don't think that is any different now, even in post kind of COVID world. We're still going to just be looking for a way to express ourselves, express circus in new ways, and who knows what those are going to be. We're right now in our process. I mentioned earlier about our creative process, because we need to give a name and a title. we need to know where we're going with that show. And as I said, we start with the mechanical world, and we're validating one of these large centerpiece devices right now. That's what I'm doing. I can do that in the shop by myself mostly, and I do a lot of work remotely with Riley, my scenic design partner and co-director, and we're doing drawings now for that. I mean, you know, there are any number of ways we as circus artists can work. I mean, I think that the thing as young circus artists that are kind of confined to their rooms or apartments or, you know, homes, it feels like I can't do anything. I think the sooner you embrace the fact that your growth and development as a circus artist has so much more to do with than just your body and your technical skills, that will serve you well. And so, you know, your path, you asked about this, Ellie, your path actually later, you know, in 20 years, you might be able to look and say, wow, if I was not confined to my room, I wouldn't have done that drawing or written that poem that gave me the motivation to do the research on that device that got me to that place where I got in front of that choreographer and I decided to go take a workshop with that person. It's going to happen, right? So, you know, I think that's the thing we need to do now, is realize there are things we can do. So what are they? You know, and it's not like necessarily about like, yes, you should and you will find a way to be physical if you can. You have to, right? You've got to stay physical. You got to work with your bodies. You will and you should. But there's so much development as circus artists that you can do that will help you, because, as I said, so much of what you need to know about getting work, about being somebody people want to work with, about learning how to be a good collaborator, about everything about your performance that will serve you well to understand. If you can learn about stage direction, you'll be better equipped when you put a show together with your friends. I mean, it just sounds kind of crazy, but there are definitely things that we can all do to kind of dive in and make sure that when the smoke clears, that we're ready to go.
That's awesome. Well, everybody, and Chris, thank you so much for joining us on this adventure today. It was great. There's more videos on our YouTube channel from dance and other circus folks, and there's more coming up. We have Tanya Burka. I'm interviewing her on April 30th, who's Silk's Kidam as well, performer, and now all over the world. She's still with Cirque. So
tell Tanya I said hello.
I will. She's, again, one of my first teachers long time ago. So I'm excited to catch up with her. And everybody stay safe, stay well. We shall see you somewhere virtually or in person soon. Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Much.
All right.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.